Okay, hello everybody. Happy Saturday. All right, we have audio. Happy Saturday. I am Sister Admin Lorinda, and I am happy and very excited to be here for week 19. Week 19 of Bible Day Live. It is my journey through the chronological Bible in a year, and we are on week 19, and which starts in 2 Samuel 10 through 15, 1 Chronicles 19 and 20, and several Psalms. Okay, so we will go ahead and get started. One of the things I know I need to do is get this screen up. Okay, so this is it. All right, so here we go. Here we go. Now, last week we talked about battlefields, and this week we see several of them. One such battlefield is 2 Samuel 10 that says, um, 2 Samuel 10, it is one such battlefield, but this theme for this week is battles, sin, and family crisis. And the soundtrack for this week is the baseline story is in 2 Samuel 10 and 15. This week's soundtrack opens with a battle and includes the stories of David and Bathsheba, Amnon and Tamar, and Absalom's conspiracy. Okay, one battlefield is 2 Samuel 10 and 6, which is a good illustration of the nuances of Bible translations. The New Living Translation of this verse reads, "When the people of Ammon realized how seriously they had angered David, they sent and hired 20,000 Aramean foot soldiers from the lands of Beth-rehob and Jobah, 1,000 from the king of Makkah, and 12,000 from the land of Tob." The King James Version of that same verse reads, "And when the children of Ammon saw that they stank before David," don't you just love the colorful language of the King James Version? Uh, stank before David, the children of Ammon sent and hired the Syrians of Beth-rehob and the Syrians of Jobah, 20,000 footmen, and of the king Makkah, 1,000 men, and of Ishtab, 12,000 men. The Arameans there refers to the ancient Semitic people who lived in a region called Aram, which is modern day Syria, mainly around Damascus. And I'm going to show you a map to put that in context, in contrast to Israel itself. Syrians is a later Greco Roman term that came to refer to the same region and its people. The term Syria was used by the Greeks and Romans, and it eventually replaced Aram in common usage. Now, that verse that we were looking at talked about that how much they had angered King David. Well, as a result of what they did to the men, that had really gone to show sympathy because the king, the Ammonite king, had died. And so he sent people to show his sympathy, and the son that had taken over from the dad that had died, his advisors told him they're not coming to show sympathy, they're coming to spy and take over. And so they cut off the beards and ripped the back out of their robes, and David told those men to just stay in Jericho until their beards had grown back, because beards in Israel, they were serious about their beards. So they had really, really angered King David, and that's what that verse is talking about. So that verse also mentioned hiring of the Arameans. They are called hired soldiers, are called mercenaries, and basically they're available for anybody who has the money. It was a common practice in ancient warfare, and they were professional soldiers, and it was a quick and easy way to supplement your army. If you didn't have enough people to fight in your army, you could just buy some army. But these people were loyal to their employer to a point. If somebody else had more money, or if they just didn't feel like it. So there was always that risk of these hired hands just not working out. But hiring mercenaries did allow rulers to quickly amass troops, but it had its risks of potential unreliability and lack of allegiance. Now, this Syria, Ammon, has a capital of Damascus. And you can see here how close it is to Israel itself. And this is the capital here, Damascus. Now, the Syrians or Arameans were frequent enemies of Israel. But when we look a little closer at this capital, Damascus, we know that this is the place that Paul was headed to when he was converted and Jesus appeared to him. And he was converted from a persecutor of the way to an apostle. In Damascus, a disciple named Ananias actually healed Paul from the blindness when he was struck on the road. Now, one of the interesting things is Ananias knew who Paul was. Now, this is a story from the New Testament. He knew who Paul was, but he also had a relationship with the Spirit to know that the Spirit of God told him to do this. So that was the moment, that road to Damascus incident with Paul. It was the moment that really marked his radical transformation from persecutor to apostle. Now, the capital of Aram, the Aramean kingdom, it was always in conflict, was very often in conflict with Israel. So this is this Damascus here, very often in conflict with Israel. Damascus was only like 150 miles from Jerusalem. So that they were neighbors and enemies. This Damascus also had a role back in Abraham's day, because you remember when Abraham wanted to see his son Isaac marry a woman from his own country, and he appointed his most trusted servant, and that was Eleazar of Damascus. Okay, so he hired Eleazar to go on a journey to bring back a wife for his son Isaac. Now, the other thing that about Damascus is it was a strategic location. It was along trade routes, and that made it a political and commercial hub. So this Damascus ended up being a place of redemptive grace, because it is where one of Christians' greatest missionaries was born spiritual. What was born spiritually? That was the place um, that he was healed and converted from a persecutor to a champion for Christ. Okay, so this Syria is the same name as Aram. The Hebrew word in that verse we read, which was 2 Samuel 10:6, it has the spelling of Aleph, Resh, Mem. Those are the Hebrew letters. So the most literal translation, which is what the NLT was using, would be Aram. Aram. So Arameans. However, during the time of King James Version, which was 1611, Syria and Syrians were more familiar to English readers. So the goal of creating the King James Version was to make it more accessible to everyday people. And so in that geopolitical time, for clarity and connection with the people who were of that time, the word Syria was used instead of Aram. So the NLT is categorized as a dynamic equivalent or thought for thought translation. The goal is to make the meaning of the original text understandable to modern readers. There were over 90 biblical scholars that worked on the translation from the original Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek texts. So, further on in 2 Samuel, we come to the story of David and Bathsheba. Now, this is a very familiar story, and in this verse, 2 Samuel 12:18, God is rebuking David. It says, I gave you your master's house and his wives and the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. And if that had not been enough, I would have given you much, much more. So God is saying to David, what need did you have of another woman, especially another woman that was somebody else's wife? Look at all that I've done for you. You let your desires get the best of you, and you made a terrible decision. And, first of all, he was laying around in the middle of the day in the spring when he should have been out fighting like kings normally did in the spring. So he actually just was absorbed with himself and what he wanted. So when he saw Bathsheba, so he's standing on the roof and he sees her, he actually sent somebody to find out who she was. And they came back and said, she is the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Now, right then and there was the opportunity to say, Uriah the Hittite, he's one of the 30, one in the inner circle. I mean, even it wasn't even like he was one of the rank and file soldiers. He was actually one of the 30 in the inner circle. And when David tried to, bring Uriah off the field and, tell him, just go home and see your wife, so they could easily say, well, the baby could have been Uriah's. He was just so loyal to the king that he couldn't bring himself to do that. And even after he'd gotten him drunk and all of that, he still slept at the palace and didn't go home to his wife. So David did that thing. He let his desire just get completely out of hand. So then comes Nathan the prophet. So to tell David a story. And the story that he tells him is there was two men in a certain town, and one was rich and one was poor, and the rich man owned great many sheep and cattle, and the poor man owned nothing but one little lamb that he had bought. And he raised that little lamb and he grew it with his children. And it ate from the man's own plate and drank from his cup. He cuddled it in his arms like a baby. And one day, a guest arrived at the home of the rich man. But instead of killing an animal from his own flock, he took the poor man's lamb and killed it and prepared it for his guests. So when Prophet Nathan, by the way, told King David this story, King David, with his indignant self, gets enraged and said the man ought to be killed. Well, of course, Nathan, calmly said, well, you're that man. All Uriah had was his wife. And you took that from him while he was out being loyal to you. And in this verse, 2 Samuel 12:10 and 12, it says, from this time on, your family will live by the sword because you have despised me by taking Uriah's wife to be your own. This is what the Lord says. Because of what you've done, I will cause your own household to rebel against you. I will give your wives to another man before your very eyes, and he will go to bed with them in public view. You did it secretly, but I will make this happen openly of all of Israel. And that is exactly what happened. When his son rebelled against him, his son was given advice to sleep with David's concubines because that would show everybody that he was really in charge. Okay? So in chapter 13, we have the story of Amnon and Tamar. So Amnon was one of David's sons, And he had a half-sister named Tamar. And he allowed himself to get obsessed with her. Okay, it's one thing if you kind of slip into obsession, but we need to get ourselves out of that as fast as we can, right? So he became obsessed with Tamar that he became ill. She was a virgin, and Amnon thought he could never have her. Duh. Okay. But Amnon had a very crafty friend, his cousin, Jonadab. He was the son of David's brother, Shemiah. Okay, so let's talk about this. You remember when David was anointed king? Samuel went over to Jesse's house and all the boys came out. Nope, not that one. Nope, not that one. Nope, not that one. And Samuel was like, is there anybody else? And they was like, yeah, but it's just a little scrawny David. He's out in the field with the shepherd where he normally is. Bring him to me. And the Lord says, that's the one. And he was anointed king. So his brothers were standing around looking at this, right? So can you imagine, okay, stories coming up talking about Uncle David being anointed king, and we're all standing there looking like him? That guy? King of Israel? Yeah, right? So this is Jonadab, David's cousin. Surely he's heard all these stories, right? David is now king. So maybe Jonadab had some ulterior motives for giving Amnon this crazy advice of telling Tamar to come and cook him a meal because he was sick and bring it to his room and feed him, and then he rapes her. So that tells me to keep in mind, as best we can, the advice that we get from other people or things that they're saying to us, what their motivation could be, what their biases could be for giving us that particular piece of advice. So we always have to try the Spirit by the Spirit. And there's just no way around that. There's no way around that, because if we don't do that, everything is coming at us. And how do we even know which way to turn and what to do? And that is why spending time engaging with the word is so important, because it creates a familiarity within us of being in the Spirit, of being close to Him. So when we make decisions, we know that familiar, calm feeling of being in the Spirit. And one of our goals is to walk in the Spirit, right? So engaging with the word gives us practice of staying familiar with what that feels like. Okay? That's how I like to think about that. So, cousin Jonadab gives Amnon some straight up whack advice. So, what happened is Absalom got wind of what happened. And Absalom took revenge for his sister and killed Amnon. And then he fled town. And he stayed gone a long time. And the captain of David's army, cooked up this scheme to bring Absalom back because David was missing him. And so he came back, but he didn't see the king. It was like 2 years, and he hadn't seen the king. So Absalom must have felt some kind of way about that. I mean, why do you bring me here if I wasn't going to be able to see the king and be reconciled with him? So he came up with his own plan to win the hearts of Israel. Oh, you know what? I don't think I have the right verse in here. I do not think I do. I think I left the same verse. Did I do that? Yep, I sure did. Well, this verse was supposed to be about how Absalom was so gorgeous. He was a good-looking man. He was the most handsome man in all of Israel. It says he was flawless from head to toe, and that he did things. He would sit at the city gates and talk about, judging the people, and he would kiss their hands, and he won their hearts. And so he led this conspiracy against David and had a whole lot of people with him. And David ended up having to leave Jerusalem. He ended up having to flee because Absalom had this group of people who were conspiring against David. And I think about how fickle people can be. Like, okay, you have a king, and yes, this is the son of the king, and I guess his good looks and the stuff that he was doing for them, it just won him over. But the interesting thing about how it ended up was it was the prophecy from Nathan that said that he would have rebellion in his own house, that David would have rebellion in his own house because of what he did. And this is exactly what happened. And in that verse 2, where that talks about how handsome Absalom was, it talked about how he didn't cut his hair but once a year, and there was so much of it that it weighed 5 pounds. Can you imagine walking around with 5-pound bag of sugar on your head? I mean, that is just a lot of hair. Can you imagine? Oh my goodness. So when the battle goes down, there were some people who were loyal to King David, and Absalom had his crew. And the battle went on. And for whatever reason, probably the reason of him still feeling guilty, David puts out this word and says, okay, yeah, go to battle, but deal gently now with Absalom, the young man. Deal gently with him. Well, Absalom got all that hair caught up in a tree and hung himself from the tree. And when Joab, which was the captain of David's army, heard about that, he was like, you out of here, and he kills him because he was hanging from the tree by all that hair. Seemed like he could have put it in a bun or something. So when David heard about how his son was dead, he started weeping over his son. And now this is the second son that David has lost because of this. Because back when David first sinned with Bathsheba, the baby that they first had got sick and died. So this is the second son in connection with that whole big sin that will be killed to fulfill that promise. But another part, well, not promise, prophecy. Another part of that prophecy was that the son, that it would be in public that this person would sleep with his wives. And that's exactly what Absalom did when he had his following to show that, he was really in charge. So this whole thing with this woman actually turned out to be a big, giant mess. So even Absalom obsessing over Tamar and David taking Bathsheba, those were things that if we could bring ourselves to do in those moments, fight that battle of that wicked desire. Okay? Like last week we talked about the battlefield. And boy, the more I study it, the more I know for sure that the biggest thing that we have is one of the biggest things has to be the battle within our own minds. But this is also proof, and it points to God never changing. God never changing. God made a covenant with David that he was going to build him a house, that his lineage would be tied to the Messiah. So even though he had to face the consequences of what he'd done by having his whole family uprooted, can you imagine how inconvenient it must have been? Like, I'm the king, but I got to just snatch up everything and run out into the wilderness because my son is coming to kill me. What a bad day is that, right? But God continued to honor his word. And that, my friends, is one of the most comforting things ever. Because despite what we do, God is faithful. God is faithful. And that is a beautiful, beautiful thing. Okay, so this is the actual listing of topics that we were going over this week. Okay. And this is the second page. And one here that I'll point out is David's great confession when he was repenting after the sin with Bathsheba. Now, when we've messed up, the right thing is to just ask God to forgive us. And in that Psalm 51, David asks God to create in me a clean heart and renew a right spirit within me. Because surely that spirit that he had that made him sleep with another man's wife and kill him, that was the wrong spirit. Okay, that was the wrong spirit. So that is my sharing for this week. The thing I wanted to point out, we're still here in our big picture. And also, just keeping in mind that what we think is the only thing that we own. And we can spend time learning to monitor our thoughts. That's just a big thing for me. Even down to the career that I choose, I need to be able to think about stuff that I want to think about. If I can't do that, then I am just really about ready to go. Okay? It has to make sense. It has to work from inside out, no matter what it is I'm doing, because it is super, super duper easy to get ourselves in inconvenient situations, to get ourselves set up. Oh, yeah, we have the promises of God. We have the word of God that won't change. But then we jack up the quality of our lives by stuff that we could have avoided. So, this is one of the reasons why I want to just make it a part of my lifestyle, make it a part of my life project to stay near the word, because consistent engagement with the word helps to refocus our minds and our hearts and our desires. And my desire is to integrate technology that is always changing with the word that never changes. That the Lord will watch between you and me while we're absent one from another. Thank you for joining me this week. This has been fun. I look forward to seeing you next week for week 19. Blessings.